The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground of Hillcrest Elementary as children poured out through the gates, their laughter mixing with the rumble of departing buses and the greetings of waiting parents. Away from the noise, standing quietly near an old sycamore tree, was 10-year-old Lila Morgan. Her brown hair was tangled at the ends, her jeans scuffed and faded, and her shoes nearly worn through. But her amber eyes, even tired as they were, held a spark untouched by hardship. Xiao clutched her backpack tightly, the strap fraying at the seams. Tucked inside her jacket pocket was her most precious belonging, a small leather-bound notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was her grandmother's recipe book, a treasure chest of handwritten love in the form of flavor. One more day, Lila whispered to herself, fingers brushing the book's edge. It had been 3 weeks since she and Grandma Helena Morse had lost their apartment. 3 weeks of library couches, bus stop benches, and the occasional park gazebo when it didn't rain. Tonight the forecast called for showers again. "Lila, are you waiting for someone?" The voice made her flinch. It was Ms. Evelyn Rhodes, her school's music teacher, standing nearby with her tote bag over one shoulder. Her tone was kind but concerned. "I'm fine," Lila replied quickly. "My ride's just late." Evelyn didn't look convinced. She'd noticed how Lila wore the same clothes for days, how she rationed her lunch, how she always lingered when school ended. "It's getting chilly," Evelyn said softly, folding her arms. "I have to organize some sheet music before I go. Want to wait in the music room?" Lila hesitated. The music room was warm and Ms. Rhodes never pried too hard. "I guess that's okay." Inside the cozy room, Evelyn shuffled pages on the piano while Lila sat silently at a student desk, her backpack in her lap. The hum of the old heater filled the silence. "Lila," Evelyn said after a while, not looking up. "Is everything okay at home?" Lila gripped the recipe book tightly. "Yes." But her voice wavered. "When I was your age," Evelyn said gently, "my dad lost his job. We had to move in with my aunt for a year. I was embarrassed, didn't want anyone to know." Something in her voice made Lila's eyes sting. The walls she'd carefully built started to tremble. "My grandma's in the hospital," she said, barely above a whisper. "She got really sick. All our money went to doctors. We couldn't pay rent anymore." Evelyn's stomach sank. "And who's been taking care of you since?" Lila looked down at her shoes. "No one. Just me. Grandma's getting better, though. She just needs more time." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Where are you staying?" "Different places," Lila answered, trying to sound casual. "The park, the library. Depends." The weight of that admission hit Evelyn like a brick. A 10-year-old. Alone. "Lila, you can't keep doing this. There are people who can help." "Please don't call social services," Lila snapped, her voice suddenly fierce. "They'll take me away and Grandma won't know where I am when she gets out. Please, Miss Rhodes." That fear, that desperation, it was raw and real. Evelyn sat down beside her, thinking fast. "When's the last time you had a warm meal?" Lila didn't answer. That was answer enough. "There's a little diner nearby," Evelyn said. "Murphy's. It's not fancy, but the owner's kind. Let's get you fed and then we'll figure out what comes next." Outside, the sun was already dipping below the rooftops. As they walked together, Lila holding her recipe book tightly in one hand and Evelyn's warm fingers in the other, she didn't feel so invisible anymore. What none of them knew was that this moment, one meal, one warm seat, was about to change everything. The bell above the door chimed with a lonely jingle as Evelyn Rhodes stepped into Murphy's Diner, a small family-run place tucked between a pawn shop and a used bookstore on Cypress Avenue. Inside, behind the long counter, Jonas Murphy, 46, stood with a rag in one hand and a half-clean coffee mug in the other. The place was warm but quiet, its booth cushions faded from time and the framed photos on the walls slightly crooked. Jonas looked up, surprised. He hadn't heard that bell ring for anything but deliveries in days. "Evening," Evelyn said, stepping inside with Lila close behind. Jonas offered a wary but polite nod. Evening. Kitchen's closed for regular orders, but I've got food I was just about to box up. This is Lila, Evelyn said, resting her hand on the girl's shoulder. She could use a warm meal. Jonas glanced down at the small girl beside her, quiet, alert, and clutching a worn notebook like it was made of gold. She reminded him of someone, but he couldn't quite place it. Well then, he said, let's not let good food go to waste. He turned and began preparing 2 plates from the day's leftovers. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans with butter. Sound okay? Lila nodded quietly and took a seat at the counter. As the aroma of the meal wafted over, her eyes widened. This smells like my Grandma Helena's, she whispered. She opened her notebook and began scribbling. Jonas raised an eyebrow. What's that you've got? My recipe book, she said shyly. Grandma and I write down every recipe we love. I'm keeping it going for her. Jonas set the plate in front of her and watched as she took the first bite. Her eyes closed. A small smile formed. Do you use mustard powder in the gravy? She asked, mid-chew. And maybe thyme? Jonas blinked. That's a sharp tongue. You've got. Most adults wouldn't pick that out. Evelyn gave a small laugh. She's got an extraordinary palate. As Lila ate, Evelyn explained everything, quietly, out of earshot. The hospitalization, the eviction, the nights spent, in parks and libraries. The girl's terror of being lost in the system, her only lifeline, the recipe book and the hope of seeing her grandmother again. Jonas leaned against the counter, arms folded, his eyes on Lila. Helena Morse, he repeated softly. That name rings a bell. She used to be head chef at Carmela's downtown, before it closed. Jonas's expression shifted. I remember her. She cooked with real heart. She was a legend. At that moment, Lila looked up. Why is the diner so empty? Your food is so good. Jonas smiled bitterly. Times change. People want flash now. Fusion menus, neon signs, fancy nonsense. This place, it's old. Simple. Lila looked around at the clean but faded booths, the handwritten specials board, and the framed photos of families who once filled these seats. This feels like home, she said quietly. Jonas stared at her as she wrote another note in her book. Despite everything she had lost, here she was, scribbling flavors into memory, honoring her grandmother's legacy like it was gospel. Sometimes, he thought, it takes a child to remind you what really matters, and he didn't know it yet. But that sentence, the one he didn't even say aloud, was about to change everything. The next morning, Jonas Murphy stood at the front window of the diner holding a small wooden frame. Inside it was a simple sign with 4 heavy words, for sale, inquire inside. His fingers traced the edges of the frame as if doing so could delay the inevitable. He remembered his father placing the original grand opening sign in that exact spot nearly 40 years ago. Now, with bills mounting and calls from suppliers growing more aggressive, there was no other choice. With a reluctant breath, he set the sign against the glass. Just then, a shadow moved on the sidewalk. He looked up, startled, to see Lila standing outside, eyes fixed on the sign. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, then to something harder. Determination. She pushed open the door, the bell above jingling like an alarm. You're selling it? She asked, her voice small but firm. Jonas sighed. Not enough customers, not enough time. Sometimes you have to know when to walk away. But where will you cook for people? She asked, her grip tightening on her recipe book. Where? Will people eat when they need comfort? Jonas smiled sadly. Good food isn't always enough to keep the lights on, kid. She didn't flinch. Instead, she moved through the dining room slowly, taking in the room again, the creaking booths, the dust-lined windowsills, the black and white family photos on the wall. Then she turned back to Jonas, eyes lit with something far bigger than her small frame should have been able to contain. My grandma always said, Lila began, when people forget what matters, you have to give them something they didn't know they were missing. Jonas raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Stories, she replied, flipping open her recipe book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, some in shaky cursive, some in careful childlike print. She said every dish has a story about the people who made it, the place it came from, the reason it exists. Before Jonas could respond, the bell jingled again. Evelyn Rhodes entered, her brow furrowed. "Lila, I couldn't find you at school. She stopped short when she noticed the sign. "Oh, Jonas, I'm so sorry." He waved it off, trying to sound casual. It was coming. Lila looked between them, her shoulders stiffening. "I want to help." Both adults turned to her in surprise. "I know I'm just a kid. But Grandma taught me things about food and people, and maybe I can help you save this place." There was no hesitation in her voice, only belief. Jonas slowly crouched to her level. "And what do you know about saving a diner?" She held out the book like a sacred object. "I know that when people forget what matters, a good meal can remind them, and that sometimes people don't need fancy. They need something that feels like home." Jonas stared at her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in his fight. That night, as rain tapped softly against the diner windows, the old place glowed like a lantern in the storm. Jonas poured 2 mugs of warm milk and handed one to Lila, who sat at a corner table with her recipe book open, her small frame wrapped in a clean apron. She hadn't said much since Evelyn had left, but the silence wasn't empty. It was focused. Jonas pulled up a chair across from her. "You're not like most kids." She shrugged, staring at the pages in front of her. "I just remember a lot." "You remember taste?" "I remember feelings," she corrected gently. "Like what it felt like when Grandma made her celebration soup, or her cornbread after it rained. She said food is how you carry love when you have no words." Jonas leaned back. That line struck something in him. "And she taught you all this?" Lila nodded. "She let me stir things, taste, write the recipes, said I had an instinct." Sounds like she was right. A flash of lightning lit up the window behind them, followed by a low growl of thunder. Lila flinched, but didn't say anything. Jonas took a sip of his milk. "You're not scared of much, are you?" "I used to be," she said. "Now I just miss things, like the sound of her voice when she said, 'Taste that again,' or how she laughed when something burned but still turned out perfect." Jonas smiled faintly. "Sounds like you two were quite the team." Lila nodded and turned a page. "This one," she said, pointing to a recipe titled Lemon Lavender Soup, "was just ours. We never got to serve it to anyone. What's in it?" She listed the ingredients, some simple, some surprising. Jonas nodded along, visibly impressed. "You made this?" "Once," she said. "And she said it would change how people felt about soup." Jonas stood. "Come on." Lila blinked. "Where?" "To the kitchen," he said. "We're going to make that soup." She hesitated. "Really? You said it would help people remember. Let's see if it helps me." In the kitchen, Lila moved with quiet confidence. Jonas prepped ingredients while she measured and stirred, occasionally peeking at her book. They worked in tandem, barely, speaking bound by rhythm and steam. When the soup was ready, Jonas filled 2 small bowls. They sat back at the table, tasting in silence. His eyes widened. "This is really good," he said. Lila smiled, pride and relief mixing on her face. "You weren't kidding," he added. "This isn't just soup." Lila looked down at her bowl, voice barely above a whisper. "It's a story." Jonas looked at the girl sitting across from him, the one who had wandered into his empty diner with a recipe book and a dream. And for the first time in years, he felt something flicker back to life. Hope. The following morning, Jonas awoke earlier than usual. The light outside was still dim, but the diner's kitchen was already warm with movement. Lila was standing at the prep counter, fully focused, her sleeves rolled up and her recipe book propped open beside her. You're up early, Jonas said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She didn't look up. I wanted to test something. He walked over and peeked into the bowl she was mixing. What is it? Cinnamon basil scones, she replied. Grandma said they confuse your tongue, but then make it happy. Jonas chuckled. Sounds dangerous. They're supposed to be served warm, with berry jam. He leaned on the counter. You know, if you keep this up, you're going to take over my kitchen. Lila finally looked up, serious. Then maybe, people will come back. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You think food is all it'll take? She shrugged. Food, and a reason. That phrase lingered. Later that day, Evelyn returned with clean clothes, books, and some toiletries for Lila. She watched quietly as the girl organized spices and scribbled new ideas in her notebook. She's really something, Evelyn said, softly as Jonas walked her to the door. She's a force, Jonas agreed. They stood there for a beat, silence filling the space between them. She wants to help save the diner, Evelyn said. And I think maybe she can. Jonas looked toward the kitchen, where Lila was adjusting a tray of biscuits in the oven. I've tried flyers, promotions, giveaways, nothing worked. Maybe people don't need marketing, Evelyn said. Maybe they need a story. That evening, as they sat around a table after dinner, Lila laid out a plan. We do a special night, she said. One night only. A full meal made from Grandma's recipes, no menu, just trust. We surprise them. Jonas tilted his head. That's risky, but exciting, Evelyn added. It's like a concert where the audience doesn't know the songs but ends up singing along anyway. Lila nodded. And each dish comes with a story, where it came from, what it meant. That's how Grandma served food, she always said. A good dish should speak before the first bite. Jonas leaned back, silent for a moment. A mystery menu, he said finally. With stories. And music, Evelyn added. Live, piano. I'll play. Jonas smiled faintly. You two are something else. Lila's eyes gleamed. We just need to give people something they didn't know they were missing. By the end of the night, the sign in the window still read for sale. But in Jonas's heart, something had shifted. The girl with the recipe book had stirred up more than soup. She'd stirred up a reason to try again. 3 days before the event, Murphy's diner felt like a different place. The counters had been scrubbed clean. The crooked picture frames were straightened. Old tablecloths were replaced with fresh linens, and tiny jars of herbs sat neatly on each table. In the kitchen, Lila stood on her trusty step stool, carefully zesting lemons into a sauce pot. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. Jonas peeked, in from the pantry, holding a bag of flour. You know, he said, when I was your age, I was still burning toast. Lila didn't look up. Did you stir clockwise? What? She pointed at the pot. Grandma says for citrus sauces, clockwise builds the right balance. Counterclockwise flattens the flavor. Jonas blinked. Well, okay then. Clockwise it is. From the dining area, Evelyn was sketching menu cards by hand. She looked up, smiling as the two worked side by side. She's really teaching you, she called out. Jonas laughed. I'm getting schooled daily. Lila's voice drifted out from the kitchen. It's not just food, it's feeling. Grandma said you can't fake it. People know when it's cooked with heart. Evelyn dipped her pen and added a flourish to the menu title, Memories on a Plate. That afternoon, as the prep continued, Evelyn sat at the corner booth helping Lila fold the mystery menu slips. Each guest would receive a small card with a space to guess the secret ingredient in each dish. Whoever guessed correctly would get a dessert on the house. People will like this, Evelyn said. They'll remember it, Lila replied. Jonas walked over, drying his hands on a towel. We'll do 4 courses. Start light, finish warm. I'll handle the main. Lila leads on the starter and dessert. You trust me with dessert? Lila asked. You earned it, Jonas said, smiling. That rosemary honey tart you made yesterday? That wasn't a child's dish, that was a chef's. Lila blushed, then nodded solemnly. Grandma used to say dessert is the last word in a story. It has to stay with people. They looked at each other. The weight of what they were building, not just a dinner but a memory, was setting in. That night, after the pots were scrubbed and the lights were dimmed, Lila sat at a booth sketching a final note in her book. Jonas slid into the seat across from her. "You nervous?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. "A little. I want it to work. For Grandma. For you." He looked around the diner. For the first time in months, it felt full, even when empty. "I think it already is," he said. The night of the event arrived quietly, but inside Murphy's diner everything pulsed with anticipation. Flickering candles sat in tiny glass jars on every table. Handwritten menus with memories on a plate and swirling script awaited the guests. The scent of fresh herbs and roasting vegetables drifted from the kitchen like an invitation no one could resist. At the back of the room, a small, upright piano gleamed in the soft light. Evelyn sat on the bench, her fingers hovering just above, the keys waiting. Jonas peeked through the pass window toward the dining room. 2 minutes, he said, half to himself. Lila stood beside him in a freshly pressed apron holding a small tray with tasting spoons and a folded menu list. She wasn't trembling, but she was buzzing. She could feel the air alive with possibility. "You ready, chef?" Jonas asked. She nodded, eyes sparkling. "Are you?" He gave a small chuckle. "Not even close." The bell above the front door chimed. Their first guests stepped in. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, longtime neighbors, took the table near the window. Then came a retired teacher, a pair of young bloggers with cameras slung around their necks, a single mom and her daughter. One by one, the room began to fill. Lila walked to each table, welcoming them with a quiet grace. "Thank you for coming. This dinner has no menu. Each course is a surprise. If you can guess the secret ingredient, dessert's on us." People smiled. They leaned in. They were curious. As Evelyn played a gentle classical tune, Jonas brought out the appetizer, lemon lavender soup, a conversation starter in a bowl. Lila stood beside him, whispering softly to the guests. "This was my grandma's favorite. She said it could warm the coldest heart." By the time the second course arrived, roasted root medley with honey thyme glaze, something remarkable had happened. The guests weren't just eating. They were engaging, laughing, sharing memories. One table, a woman teared up after a single bite. "This reminds me of my mother's kitchen. She used to use cinnamon in her carrots, too." Jonas caught that moment from the kitchen window and felt his throat tighten. Evelyn transitioned to a soft jazz piece as the third course, a slow braised lamb dish, was served. Lila bounced between tables, collecting guesses for the game. "Is you the secret in the sauce clove?" one guest asked. "Very close," she said with a smile, "but not quite." As dessert rolled out, a rosemary honey tart served with a dollop of cream, Lila placed a small note beside each plate. On it, a quote from her recipe book. "Dessert is the last word in a meal. Make it sweet enough to be remembered." By night's end, plates were clean, candles had melted low, and no one wanted to leave. A soft cheer erupted when Lila emerged from the kitchen to thank them. She stood near the piano, cheeks flushed from heat and happiness. "This was my grandma's dream," she said, "and now it's mine too. Thank you for being part of it." They applauded. Jonas stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This place was almost gone," he said. "But she reminded me what it could be." As the final guest left, Lila whispered, "Do you think she'd be proud?" Jonas looked at her. "She already is." The next morning, Jonas sat at the counter, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. The diner was quiet, sunlight pouring through the windows, dancing off the empty glasses and polished salt shakers. Everything felt brighter, like the walls themselves had exhaled. Lila came out of the kitchen still wearing her apron, a smudge, a flower on her cheek. "Morning," she said. "You sleep at all?" Jonas asked. She nodded. "A little." I dreamed about the soup. Jonas chuckled. That might be a first. She climbed onto a stool beside him. People liked it. They didn't just like it, Jonas said, turning to her. They remembered. Lila pulled her recipe book from her coat pocket. We should do another night. Same menu? No, she said. We rotate, every week, different themes, different stories. Every week. Jonas blinked. That's ambitious. We could call them story suppers. Every dish comes with a note card. People guess ingredients again, and you tell the backstory of the dish. Jonas rubbed his chin. You're serious about this? Lila nodded. I want to keep it going for her. Later that day, Evelyn returned with fresh flyers she had designed, story suppers at Helena and Lila's, a taste of memory. Each week, a new story, a new menu, a new reason to gather. They posted them on the diner windows, the school bulletin board, the library entrance. Word spread quickly. By Wednesday, local bloggers were writing about the mysterious little diner run by a girl and her guardian, chef. By Friday, they had a waiting list for the next story supper. Jonas had to call back 2 of his old kitchen hands to help. And Lila? She was now writing her own recipes, original ones. She tested spice levels with precision, adjusted cooking times like a pro, and even began plating dishes with thoughtful detail. She's not just a helper, Jonas told Evelyn one evening, as they watched her guide the new prep cook. She's the engine. Evelyn smiled. She's exactly where she's meant to be. That weekend, as they cleaned up after another full night of guests, Lila turned to Jonas. Do you think Grandma knows what we're doing? He nodded. I think she knows. And I think she's waiting. Lila's heart thumped. Then we need to find her, she said quietly. Soon. The next week brought cold winds and colder calls. Evelyn had been working quietly behind the scenes, contacting hospitals, assisted living centers, and clinics across the region. The problem was Helena Morse had been admitted under emergency conditions and without identification. She'd slipped through every system crack until Tuesday. Jonas was wiping down the front counter when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Murphy's Diner, he answered. The voice on the other end was shaky but smiling. Jonas, it's Evelyn. We found her. He froze. Say that again? She's at Memorial General, about 40 miles out. Stable, recovering. She's been asking for Lila. His breath left him in a rush. He turned and saw Lila entering from the kitchen, carrying a tray of bread rolls. Lila, he said, put that down. We're going for a drive. They reached the hospital by evening. The halls smelled of antiseptic and quiet hope. Room 412 stood near the end of a long corridor, pale blue walls framing the door. Lila hesitated, frozen mid-step. Jonas knelt beside her. She's in there. She's waiting for you. Lila clutched her recipe book to her chest. What if she doesn't remember me? She will, he said, because you never forgot her. She nodded once, then walked slowly into the room. There, sitting upright near the window was Helena Morse, thinner now with silver hair tied loosely and a blanket around her legs. But her eyes, when they met Lila's, were alive with recognition. Lila? She whispered. Grandma. The girl ran into her arms, sobbing, trembling with joy. Jonas and Evelyn stood quietly in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the reunion. I thought I lost you, Helena whispered, holding Lila's face in her hands. I've been cooking for you, Lila said. I saved our recipes. You did more than that, Helena replied. You made them live. The next day, as Jonas stepped out of the hospital cafe, he found a sharply dressed man waiting by the entrance of the room. Jonas Murphy? The man asked, flashing a business card. Martin Kessler, Tri-Point Hospitality Group. We spoke a few weeks ago. Jonas frowned. You offered me a lowball for the diner. Martin grinned like it didn't matter. We've seen the buzz online. The girl. The mystery menus. That's a brand with legs. A woman in a sleek pantsuit stepped forward. I'm Denise Langford, VP of Development. We're prepared to triple our original offer, acquire the diner, the recipes, the story, and your rising star of a little chef. Jonas said nothing. You'd clear your debt, Denise added. Open 2 more locations. Get your life back. Behind them, Lila peeked through the hospital window, her arms wrapped protectively around her recipe book. Jonas looked back at the card in his hand, and then toward the girl who had reminded him what food could mean. He didn't need time to decide. Jonas Murphy stood just outside room 412, the business card from Tri-Point Hospitality still warm in his palm. Inside, Lila sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, animatedly flipping through the recipe book, telling stories of the meals, the mystery menus, the soup that made a guest cry. Helena listened, smiling, her eyes misting over again and again. Jonas tucked the card into his pocket and stepped inside. Helena, he said warmly. Her smile widened. I hear you've been feeding the whole town with my granddaughter. She's the boss now. Jonas chuckled. I just clean up behind her. Helena's hand reached out and took his. Thank you for keeping her safe and seen. She did most of the saving, he replied. But I have to ask you something. Helena tilted her head. What would you say to coming home? He asked. Not just to Lila, but to the diner, as a partner. Helena blinked. What? Lila wants you back in the kitchen, we all do. Not just in name, but in spirit. We want to build something real. Honest. Ours. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. But your debt? I turned them down, Jonas said. The big money offer. They wanted to buy everything, your story, her recipes, even our name. But this place wasn't built to be franchised, it was built to matter. Helena's throat tightened. You turned down that much money? He shrugged. How do you sell something that saved you? Lila looked at them both and said softly, we could call it Helena and Lila's. Jonas smiled. That's exactly what I was thinking. By the following week, Jonas, Helena, Evelyn, and Lila stood under a scaffold as a new sign was hoisted above the front door of the once-forgotten dinner, painted in elegant lettering, Helena and Lila's, where every dish tells a story. The transformation was more than visual. The walls had been repainted, the tables refinished. A chalkboard near the entrance listed the theme of the week. Story, supper, lessons from the garden, with dish titles like rain-soaked radish soup and basil lemonade for the brave. Inside, the team worked like a well-oiled family. Evelyn curated music and hosted live piano nights. Helena and Lila led the kitchen with a calm authority that inspired. Jonas managed the logistics, still acting as the anchor of it all. Each Monday, they closed to the public and opened their doors for community night, serving meals to families in need, no questions asked. And in the quiet hours after the guests were gone, Lila wrote new recipes in her book. Hers now, but built on her grandmother's shoulders. That night, as candles flickered low and the kitchen cooled, the 4 of them gathered at a back table. Helena raised her glass of sparkling cider. To second chances, she said. To food that heals, Evelyn added. To family you find, Jonas offered. And Lila, with her recipe book open beside her, smiled and said, to stories you can taste and never forget. They clinked glasses. Outside, the world turned. But inside that little diner on Cypress Avenue, something sacred had been rebuilt. Not with money, not with marketing, but with memory, courage, and love. 3 months later, Helena and Lila's was more than a restaurant. It was a heartbeat in the center of town. People came not just to eat, but to connect. Each week featured a new story supper theme, harvest and healing, storms and spices, roots and reminders, with every dish inspired by real moments from Helena and Lila's lives. Each table included a handwritten card with the story behind, the meal, and a place for guests to write memories of their own. Photos of submitted stories now lined a wall titled, The Memory Mural. On Mondays, the diner closed to paying guests and welcomed anyone in need. Families from shelters, Elderly locals on fixed incomes, even teens from group homes came for a warm meal and soft piano music. It was dignity served without a price tag. Lila took charge of those nights. Everyone deserves dessert, she always said, and every plate left the kitchen with something sweet, no matter what. One afternoon, Lila sat in the back booth with her recipe book laid out across 3 open notebooks. She was helping Helena draft what they now called the book, From Sidewalk to Supper, a journey through memory and flavor. It was part memoir, part cookbook, part survival story. The local publisher who dined with them on Resilience Night had offered to publish it with national distribution. Proceeds would fund a youth culinary scholarship in Lila's name. Will people actually read it? Lila had asked. Jonas leaned across the booth and replied, They'll read it the way they taste your soup, slowly, with awe. Helena smiled. And they'll remember you. That evening, Evelyn hosted Open Story Night, where guests could share family recipes or short memories about food. An elderly man recited the way his wife used to serve burnt toast and call it golden crisp. A young mother talked about the first time her son smiled over peanut butter noodles. And then Jonas took the mic. I almost gave this place away, he said quietly. I was ready to walk out, but then someone walked in, with a recipe book and a reason to fight. He looked at Lila sitting between Helena and Evelyn, glowing in the light of everything they'd built. I thought I was saving her, he added, but she saved me. Applause filled the room. Lila covered her face, laughing through tears. Later that night, as they all locked up and stepped outside beneath the glowing sign, Jonas looked at the 3 women who had rewritten his world. Was thinking, he said, we should add a quote to the back of the book. Helena raised an eyebrow. What quote? Jonas turned to Lila. Yours. Lila blinked. Which one? He smiled. The one you always say when we finish a meal. Lila grinned. Easy. Good food can't fix everything, but it sure gives you the strength to try. They all nodded. Then they turned off the lights, stepped out into the quiet night, and let the warmth of their shared story carry them home.